Alyssa Monroe was a woman who radiated warmth, charm, and a vibrant energy that lit up every room she walked into. At just 25 years old, she had already become a well-known figure within the LGBTQ+ community in Atlanta, Georgia. Alyssa was a beacon of strength, a trans woman who had overcome immense obstacles to live authentically. Her decision to transition had been difficult and met with various struggles, but Alyssa's resilience was unparalleled. She had a natural charisma, her long chestnut brown hair and bright green eyes making her stand out in any crowd. Outside of her social circle, Alyssa worked as a project manager for a local nonprofit dedicated to helping LGBTQ+ individuals find acceptance and equal rights. Her job not only aligned with her values but also served as an outlet for her advocacy. Alyssa believed strongly in social justice and was passionate about fighting for the rights of those in marginalized communities. But despite her public persona of confidence, Alyssa was far from immune to the struggles of love, loneliness, and vulnerability that many face. Though Alyssa's outward life seemed full of promise, she grappled with feelings of insecurity, wondering if she would ever find true love or acceptance. Her social media presence, filled with glamorous photos and nights out with friends, masked a loneliness she carried with her. In the world of socializing, Alyssa shone. She was a regular at Atlanta's LGBTQ+ bars, an iconic figure at drag shows, and a sought-after companion at pride events. Her inner circle admired her for her infectious laugh, unyielding spirit, and bold personality. But Alyssa had yet to find someone who truly saw her for who she was, a woman deserving of love, respect, and equality. At the heart of Alyssa's story was her desire for meaningful connection. She sought out relationships where she could be loved and not hidden, where she could exist fully as herself. As with many trans women, Alyssa faced her fair share of discrimination in the dating world, encountering individuals who either fetishized her or were unwilling to accept her identity in the light of day. Despite these challenges, she remained hopeful that one day she would find someone who understood and accepted her. Jason Carter, a 32-year-old finance professional, seemed to live a perfect life from the outside. He worked at a prestigious investment firm in Atlanta, had a well-paying job that allowed him to live in a luxury apartment, and was in a long-term relationship with Emily Saunders, his girlfriend of 5 years. To their friends and colleagues, Jason and Emily were the quintessential couple, beautiful, successful, and seemingly destined for marriage. But beneath this polished surface, Jason was struggling with an internal war. Raised in a conservative household, Jason had been taught to suppress his desires and feelings, particularly those that didn't conform to traditional gender norms. Despite being in a committed relationship with Emily, he had always wrestled with his attraction to men, a struggle that intensified when he met Alyssa. In her, Jason saw someone who defied all of his expectations of what he should want. His connection with Alyssa felt both thrilling and terrifying, as he began to realize that he had spent most of his life hiding his true self. Jason's attraction to Alyssa wasn't simply about her physical beauty. It was about the freedom she embodied, the way she moved through the world unapologetically as her true self. However, he couldn't fully accept the feelings she stirred in him. His shame and confusion led him to build walls around his emotions, and rather than exploring these feelings openly, he sought to bury them. His struggle to reconcile his desires with his reality made him vulnerable to intense internal conflict. The relationship between Jason and Alyssa began in secrecy, rooted in the complex web of emotions, shame, and excitement. Jason, despite being in a long-term relationship with his girlfriend Emily, felt a magnetic pull toward Alyssa, who embodied everything he had been struggling with internally. Their connection was electric, a blend of attraction and vulnerability that drew them together quickly. Jason was enthralled by Alyssa's authenticity, something he had never experienced before. Alyssa, who had always felt overlooked in past relationships, saw Jason as someone who could potentially offer her the love and acceptance she craved. They began to meet in private locations, away from their respective circles, sneaking around to protect Jason's carefully crafted public image as the perfect boyfriend. What started with innocent flirtation soon deepened into a passionate affair. At first, their relationship felt liberating. Alyssa experienced a sense of excitement that she hadn't felt in a long time. Jason appeared to be the attentive, caring lover she had always wanted, showering her with compliments, gifts, and late-night texts. But the secrecy started to take a toll on both of them. Alyssa began to feel frustrated by the constant hiding, while Jason became increasingly conflicted about his feelings for her, caught between his love for her and his devotion to Emily. The affair, once thrilling, now felt like a dangerous game. A game that was becoming harder to maintain. For Jason, the secrecy was as much a source of excitement as it was a source of torment. While Alyssa wanted a future, Jason's inability to be open about their relationship slowly began to chip away at the trust between them. He would claim that things needed to stay discreet for the time being, but Alyssa's frustration grew as she found herself questioning Jason's true feelings. Jason, on the other hand, clung to the illusion that he could have both worlds, that he could continue his relationship with Emily while secretly being with Alyssa. The more they saw each other, the more Jason's possessiveness emerged, leading to controlling behavior that Alyssa struggled to cope with. As the weeks went on, Jason's personality began to show new, erratic facets that left Alyssa feeling unsure about the stability of their relationship. Jason was unpredictable. On some days he was affectionate, gentle, and kind, showing Alyssa the love and care she had always dreamed of. He would text her throughout the day, call her to check in, and spend hours in deep conversation about their hopes and dreams. But on other days, Jason could be distant, cold, and angry, even for seemingly trivial reasons. His mood swings became more pronounced, and Alyssa noticed that when they argued, Jason would often retreat into silence or lash out with harsh words. It was as if the fear of losing control over their relationship was slowly consuming him. Alyssa began to feel like she was walking on eggshells, unsure of which version of Jason she would encounter each time they met. At times he would talk about a future with her, speaking of love and possibility, while other times he became defensive, accusing her of being too needy or demanding. Jason's behavior grew more intense. At one point, he became jealous when Alyssa casually mentioned a friend she had met out, sending him into a spiral of suspicion. His possessiveness was becoming overwhelming, and Alyssa began to question whether this relationship was built on love or on a need for control. The unpredictable Jason was deeply troubling. One night, after a minor disagreement about their future, he disappeared for hours, leaving Alyssa feeling anxious and abandoned. When he returned, he acted as though nothing was wrong, but Alyssa's unease was only growing. The highs of their relationship were exhilarating, but the lows left her drained, unsure of how to manage her emotions. She had to face the harsh truth. Jason's unpredictability was beginning to wear her down. After months of emotional turbulence and growing tension, Alyssa knew it was time to confront Jason about the chaos their relationship had become. The secrecy, the possessiveness, and the erratic behavior from Jason were no longer something she could tolerate. She could no longer endure the emotional strain and the deep sense of uncertainty that clouded her life. She knew that their affair was damaging not only her emotional well-being, but also Jason's state of mind. Alyssa made up her mind to meet him in person and bring everything to light. They arranged to meet at a quiet park far from prying eyes, a place where they had once shared peaceful moments before the turbulence set in. As they sat on a bench, she finally spoke her truth, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Jason, this isn't working. We're living a lie, and I can't do it anymore." Jason, taken aback by the sudden confrontation, tried to maintain his calm, but his discomfort was apparent. "What are you talking about? We have something real. I know we do," he responded, his voice shaking slightly. He didn't want to face the reality that Alyssa was walking away. The thought of losing her shattered him, but he refused to accept it. Alyssa took a deep breath, trying to control her rising emotions. "I can't keep hiding, Jason. I can't keep living in the shadows. I need honesty, and you can't even give me that. You're still with Emily, and you haven't even told her the truth. It's unfair to both of us." Jason's face twisted with frustration, then with a hint of anger. "I love you, Alyssa. You have to believe that. You're making a huge mistake." He tried to reach out to her, but Alyssa pulled back. The desperation in his eyes was starting to turn into something darker. But Alyssa was resolute. She had made her decision. "No, Jason, I'm done. I'm not going to be part of your secret life anymore." With that, she stood up to leave. Jason watched her walk away, but his mind was already racing with thoughts of how to fix things. His emotions were spiraling out of control, and he couldn't bear the idea of losing her. After Alyssa left, Jason was unable to accept that it was truly over. He had always been in control of his life, but Alyssa's departure threatened that. He became consumed by thoughts of her, each moment without her making him feel more and more desperate. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat. His mind was trapped in an obsessive loop, convinced that if he could just make her understand, she would come back. He began to call her incessantly, leaving voice messages filled with pleading words, telling her he loved her and couldn't live without her. Every time Alyssa refused to answer, Jason's desperation only grew. He started to follow her to places he knew she frequented, her favorite coffee shop, the park where they had met for the confrontation, and even her workplace. He wasn't trying to hurt her, he was trying to reconnect, but his actions became increasingly erratic. Jason's behavior alarmed his friends and family, but they didn't know how far gone he was. He isolated himself from everyone, except for the fleeting interactions with Alyssa's social media accounts, obsessively scrolling through her posts, trying to find a sign that she still cared. His once calm and collected demeanor was replaced by a man spiraling into an uncontrollable rage. Days passed, and his obsession turned into something more dangerous. He would go days without sleeping, barely functioning at work, and spending all his free time trying to track Alyssa down. The man who had once been in control of his life was now a shadow of his former self, consumed by jealousy and fear of losing her. His downward spiral was unstoppable. Alyssa's decision to cut ties with Jason had been a long time coming. Their relationship had spiraled out of control, marked by secrecy, obsession, and manipulation. But no matter how many times she tried to walk away, Jason's relentless pursuit of her seemed to pull her back. After weeks of avoidance and growing frustration, Alyssa realized there was no way forward without confronting the man who had once held such a significant place in her life. The meeting was set for one last discussion, a moment where everything would finally be laid bare. Alyssa agreed to meet Jason at his apartment, a place that had once been filled with warmth and love, now tainted by the toxic dynamic that had overtaken their connection. She knew it was dangerous to meet him again, but she also felt it was necessary to put an end to the emotional roller coaster. As Alyssa entered Jason's apartment, she immediately felt the tension in the air. The place felt different now, stifling, suffocating. Jason was waiting for her, his posture rigid and his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. It was a mixture of fear, rage, and desperation. The man she had once trusted was now a stranger, someone consumed by his own demons. "Why are you doing this, Alyssa?" Jason's voice was low, almost pleading. He tried to approach her but hesitated as she took a step back, keeping her distance. "I'm done, Jason," Alyssa said, her voice calm but firm. "This isn't love anymore. It's control, manipulation, and lies. I can't keep doing this." Jason's face twisted, and for a brief moment it looked as though he might cry. But then something shifted. His expression darkened and his eyes began to burn with anger. "You don't understand. You're making a mistake, Alyssa. We belong together." Alyssa's heart pounded. She knew this wasn't just a plea, it was an ultimatum. "No, Jason, you're not listening to me. I need space. I need to be free of all this." As she turned to leave, Jason's desperation escalated. "You can't leave me. You're mine." His voice cracked as he moved quickly toward her, grabbing her arm with an intensity that startled her. Alyssa recoiled, trying to free herself. "Jason, please, let go. This isn't you." But Jason's grip tightened, and in that moment, Alyssa realized how far gone he truly was. The man she had once loved had been replaced by someone who would do anything to keep her under his control. As the struggle continued, Alyssa's mind raced for an escape, but fear gripped her. The man she feared was now physically imposing and out of control. "Stop! Please, just let me go!" Alyssa cried out, her voice shaking. But Jason seemed to hear nothing but his own tortured mind. It wasn't just a fight to hold on to her anymore. It was a fight to make sure no one else could have her. He felt betrayed, enraged, and threatened in a way he couldn't comprehend. Alyssa, realizing the danger escalating before her eyes, feared that if she didn't leave now, she might never be able to escape. With one final push, she broke free from his grip and ran to the door. Jason stood still, his breath heavy, staring after her as she fled, but the look in his eyes was now colder than ever. Alyssa didn't look back. Jason's descent into madness was something that Alyssa had never truly understood. She had hoped that distance would make him see reason, that his obsession would eventually subside, but instead, her rejection fueled his rage, turning his love into something dangerously warped. His thoughts began to spiral uncontrollably, consumed by the idea that without her, his life was meaningless. The quiet nights Jason spent obsessing over Alyssa's departure became more intense. Every unanswered text, every ignored phone call added fuel to the fire. He began stalking her, following her to her work, watching from a distance as she continued to live a life without him. Jason's emotions had long since crossed the line between pain and anger into something more destructive. He was no longer rational. On a fateful evening, consumed by jealousy and obsession, Jason made a decision that would alter his life and Alyssa's forever. Unable to comprehend the finality of her rejection, he decided that he couldn't let her slip from his grasp. In his twisted mind, if he couldn't have her, no one else could. He convinced himself that he was entitled to her, that her life without him was unacceptable. Armed with a gun, Jason went to Alyssa's apartment. His heart raced, and his thoughts were a jumbled mess of desperation and entitlement. He believed that by confronting her, by forcing her to understand his pain, she might come back to him. He thought that through sheer force, he could reverse the course of their fractured relationship. When Alyssa answered the door, her face contorted in shock at the sight of him standing there, gun in hand. Her voice was trembling as she pleaded with him, "Jason, don't do this, you need help, please put the gun down." But Jason was beyond reasoning. The emotional turmoil he had been feeling for weeks or perhaps even months had pushed him past the point of no return. He wanted to control her, to make her understand that he couldn't live without her. His grip on reality had loosened entirely. "Why won't you just stay with me, Alyssa?" His voice broke, but there was no turning back now. The overwhelming sense of loss, of abandonment consumed him. He pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot was deafening. In an instant, Alyssa's life was over, her body crumpling to the floor. Jason stood motionless, staring at the consequences of his actions, as if he had just woken from a nightmare. It was too late for him to comprehend what he had done. What followed was a deafening silence, broken only by Jason's own breathing, ragged and shallow. The room seemed to spin, as if the walls themselves were closing in. He hadn't planned for this. He never wanted her dead, he just wanted her to love him again, but it was too late. In a haze of confusion and regret, he realized he had crossed a line that could never be undone. The news of Alyssa's murder spread quickly, sending shockwaves through her community and leaving her family and friends devastated. They could hardly believe that the vibrant, kind-hearted woman they knew had been taken from them so violently. Alyssa's life had been tragically cut short, and her family was left with the painful question of how things had gone so terribly wrong. Jason was arrested almost immediately after the crime. Neighbors had heard the gunshot and called the authorities. When the police arrived, they found Jason standing over Alyssa's lifeless body, the gun still in his hand. There was no sign of a struggle. He didn't try to flee, didn't attempt to cover up his actions. He simply stood there dazed, staring at what he had done. Jason's arrest was a blur to him. In the aftermath, he was numb, unable to process the depth of the tragedy he had caused. His defense attorneys later tried to argue that he was experiencing a mental breakdown, claiming that his obsession with Alyssa had driven him to this moment of madness. But the prosecution painted a much clearer picture of a man who, for months, had stalked, manipulated, and threatened Alyssa, whose controlling and obsessive behavior had escalated to the point of violence. The trial was long and painful for everyone involved. Alyssa's family gave emotional testimony, describing the kind, loving woman she had been and the torment they endured seeing her change over time as she struggled to escape Jason's control. They spoke about how Alyssa had tried repeatedly to break free, but Jason had refused to let her go. It became clear to the court that his fixation on her had been unhealthy and destructive from the beginning. Jason's defense did little to sway the jury. His argument of mental instability did not change the fact that he had consciously made the decision to take Alyssa's life. In the end, the jury convicted Jason of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Though the verdict brought a sense of justice for Alyssa's family, it could never bring her back. The pain of her loss was an unbearable void in their lives, one that could not be filled by the knowledge that her killer would never see freedom again. For Jason, the sentence marked the end of a life that had once been filled with possibility, but had ultimately been consumed by his own emotional turmoil. There was no redemption, no second chance. He would spend the rest of his life in a cell, grappling with the consequences of his actions, a lifetime of regret that could never undo the destruction he had caused. Alyssa's death, though tragic, did not go unnoticed. Her family, devastated by the loss, found a way to channel their grief into something positive. They worked tirelessly to ensure that Alyssa's story would be heard, not just as a personal tragedy, but as a cautionary tale for others. Her family established the Alyssa Monroe Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping victims of emotional abuse, stalking, and obsessive behavior. The foundation provided support for people in toxic relationships, offering counseling, legal aid, and resources for escaping abusive situations. They also worked to raise awareness about the often overlooked dangers of emotional manipulation and control in relationships, striving to educate others on how to recognize the warning signs before things escalated. The foundation became a beacon of hope for those trapped in similar situations to Alyssa's, giving them the tools and the courage to seek help. Survivors shared their stories, and through the foundation's work, they were able to find the strength to rebuild their lives. Alyssa's name became synonymous with resilience and empowerment in the fight against abusive relationships. In the years following her death, Alyssa's story continued to inspire change. Her family worked alongside lawmakers to push for stronger laws around stalking and emotional abuse. They advocated for more stringent legal protections for victims of intimate partner violence, urging officials to take all forms of abuse seriously, not just physical violence, but the subtle, manipulative tactics that could leave long-lasting scars. Alyssa's memory lived on in the Foundation's work, in the countless lives saved, and in the voices of survivors who had found their strength through the grief of her loss. Her story was a reminder that no one should have to live in fear of a partner, no matter how loving their relationship once seemed. The legacy of Alyssa Monroe was one of hope, strength, and a reminder that the fight for justice didn't end with the trial. It lived on in the work of those who fought to ensure no one else would suffer the same fate.